This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 459, off the cuff, number 8. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. On today's show, we're talking about config actions, the Panels Favorite Drupal Modules, and Drupal Contribution in general. We'll also cover Transform API as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're discussing a bunch of Drupal topics with our hosts, Batty Sonia Breitart, CEO and co-founder at 1X Internet, Martin Anderson Klutz, Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia, Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and myself, John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM. How's everybody doing?
Doing great.
Good.
Great to be here.
Martin, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us what you have this week.
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to expose your Drupal site's data as JSON using view modes, formatters, blocks, and more? There's a module for that. It's called Transform API, and it was created in September of 2023 by Lupus Gray, aka Martin Geising of Denmark. It has 1.0.0 beta 4 and 1.0.2 versions available, both of which work with Drupal 9 and 10. And it is actively maintained. In fact, the most recent commit was earlier today. It does also have security coverage. And as for documentation, it has both an in-depth README as well as a full user guide. It has 14 open issues, 3 of which are bugs, but none of them are against the current branch. And according to Drupal.org, it is officially in use by 2 sites. Now, after installing Transform API, you should be able to get the JSON for any entities on your site by adding the format equals JSON as a parameter to the URL. To get more fields exposed as JSON, you can also configure a transform mode using a field UI configuration very similar to view modes. You can also add transform blocks to globally include specific data in all transformed URLs in the same way that you would normally use blocks to show information on your entity pages. The output of transform blocks is also segmented into regions as they will be provided in the JSON output. Now, where Drupal's standard engine produces render arrays that ultimately become HTML, Transform API replaces it with an engine that produces transform arrays that will ultimately become JSON. Where the standard JSON API output of Drupal more or less exposes all information as raw data for the front end to format, Transform API allows for more of the formatting to be managed on the back end, where it will use Drupal's standard caching mechanisms, permission-based access, and more. Transform API also supports lazy transformers, which are callbacks that will be used after caching but before the JSON response is sent. And you can also use alter hooks to manipulate the transform data. So let's talk about Transform API.
Yeah, this sounds like it might solve some of the issues we were talking about last week with Next.js. Like it might give you the ability to kind of manipulate the data a little bit more before it goes out. I'm curious if how it handles like images, for example, if you can have it give a lot more of that data organically. This seems powerful.
Yeah, from what I was reading, it'll do things like with responsive images, basically provide all of the image URLs for that responsive image so that, there isn't any sort of extra work that has to be done on the front end to sort of, manipulate the paths to get the different sizes and so on.
Got it. That was going to be part of my question, I guess, was like, what does the output look like? Is it just the field data, or is it like bringing in all of the template stuff as well? It sounds like it's just the field data though, right?
It's the field data, but you can also apply transformers, like field level transformers, so that the data can have some level of formatting. So a simple example as a date, as opposed to it, providing, a UTC sort of formatted timestamp the way you would normally see passed in JSON. You could theoretically, if you wanted to, do some of that formatting in the back end so that it gets passed to the front end as something that can just be output.
Got it. Well, that seems to make sense, and I do agree with Nick. This seems very, very useful, especially if you're trying to build some sort of headless site or use your data in multiple places. So cool. Well, Martin, thanks for another wonderful module of the week. If folks wanted to suggest a module or talk more about this module, where could they go about to do that?
So this module was actually nominated by, friend of the show, Matthew Scarset, and that was in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack. So, certainly happy to talk about modules of the week or receive nominations there. But folks can also reach out to me directly as ManClue on all of the Drupal and social channels.
Wonderful. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. Let's talk about life after Drupal 7 end of life. Since August 2023, there has been a lot of discussion around Drupal 7's official end of life in January 2025. It's no secret that many companies, organizations, and individuals are still on Drupal 7 and have yet to migrate. I think we can all agree that migration, while beneficial, is not always feasible. This is where Hero Devs comes in. Hero Devs has partnered with core team maintainers of Drupal 7 to build and maintain their Drupal 7 never-ending support product, ensuring the same quality of support you have come to expect over the years. Drupal 7 never-ending support, or NES, allows for an effortless transition, allowing your site to remain secure, compliant, and compatible after Drupal 7 goes end of life. This allows you to migrate on your own time or potentially not at all. Hero Devs promises to keep D7 alive and well, even offering support for the current top 100 Drupal 7 modules. If you'd like to know more about Drupal 7 never-ending support, visit herodevs.com. That's HERODEVS.com. All right. So for those of you that aren't familiar with an off the cuff, our hosts have picked a number of topics that they'd like to talk about, and we're going to go kind of around the horn and discuss those topics. But first, before we do that, we kind of teased at the top of the show that he is going to a soccer match. We are wondering if you would just tell the listeners who's playing and what your predictions are for that match.
Okay, so I'm going to the semifinals of the European Championship in soccer, or what we call football. And today is playing Spain against France. And the other two teams that are playing tomorrow are Netherlands against England. And of course, I am a huge fan of the Spanish team. So as all of the other of my favorite teams are already out, I will say here that next Sunday, I hope that we will see Spain as the new European champion in Iceland, in Europe.
There you go.
In soccer.
So who's your favorite player?
In the Spanish team?
Yeah.
Or generally? Okay. In the Spanish team, we have this 16-year-old amazing guy called Yamal. So it's, I think, the youngest player. So he's so young and he's so good. So I can't say anything else than, like, of course, watching such an amazing soccer player, so young, being on the big stage, they're playing against all the big stars. Yeah, so he's my favorite now today.
Great. We'll have to have an update next week on how things turned out and if your predictions were correct. All right, let's jump into some more Drupal-y topics. Although at one point in time, MLS was on Drupal. Maybe they still are. I don't know, but somebody can figure that out, I'm sure. So new config action. So we're going to actually have a show in a couple of weeks here about config actions. But Martin, tell us a little bit about the new config action for placing blocks and why it's so great.
Thanks, John. Longtime listeners of the show will may be aware that I have been maintaining a series of modules that are sort of recipe-like in the sense that they really are just kind of a module wrapper for providing some, configuration to solve for common use cases, like, creating an event system, adding a task management site, really just sort of configuring fairly common elements into something that solves something that is a need that lots of sites have as sort of a common pattern. Recipes, have a lot of overlap with that same idea, but recipes as kind of a foundational element, I would say, of Starshot and kind of the vision for that. To me, what's really exciting about the whole recipe system is really this idea of config actions, because it provides a much more sort of flexible and nuanced way to provide configuration to a website. And so this place block config action is something that, I'm kind of invested in, like literally, got a lot of time put towards trying to make this into something useful based on my own experience of creating some of these modules and some of the challenges. So as a simple example, with configuration, when you go to place a block, if you're doing it as sort of explicit configuration, you have to tell it exactly what theme to use. So you can't just sort of say like, whatever the default theme for the site is for the front end of the site, place it there. You actually have to know the name of the theme. You have to sort of specifically say exactly what region it's going to go in and provide an exact weight. And so that may or may not turn out to be the result that you intended as sort of, certainly as a module author, but, potentially even as, a recipe author. And so this idea of the place block config action is to provide a lot more flexibility. So you can do things like, say, place this block into like the admin theme or the default theme, and then it'll do the work of figuring out what the machine name of that is, and then try and use that as where it's going to place the block. You can provide an array of different regions to say whichever one of these is one that that default theme is using, use that as the region, again, as opposed to having to know an exact region where it's going to be placed. And you can say things like for the weight, place it first or last, and it'll do the work of figuring out what's the numerical value that it needs to actually have it sort of go those places. And so I feel like, this is an example of the power that we're going to see emerge out of this whole idea of config actions and ultimately make recipes a lot more flexible and powerful in terms of providing configuration as that really useful starting point for site builders.
I think one of the really nice things about that too is you still might need to reorder blocks, right? But I feel like that's a much lower barrier than needing to like choose a region and then click add block and then figure out how to find it and then go to another page and configure the settings. Like it's just, maybe after a recipe applies something like that, there's some sort of link or something that says, hey, you may want to reorder these blocks, and then a link to a block layout page. You drag and drop, save it, you're done. So it does a lot to removing, like placing a block isn't hard, but if you're not familiar with Drupal, it's 5, 6, 7 steps that you probably have no idea what they are. Whereas with this, it makes it, sounds like once it gets in, it'll make it a lot easier for recipe maintainers to manage.
So this sounds great as far as like, hey, your module needs a block and you need to place that block, and you can kind of generalize it, right? To be able to say like, hey, we don't have to know the specific theme or the specific region, like, or where, right? So like that all makes complete sense to me. I like it. But I'm wondering, and maybe this is like a phase 2, or maybe this is something completely different, but like two big problems that I see with blocks, one specifically around configuration, right, is anybody that's done like a config sync or a config export knows that typically block content does not get saved into config, right? So like you input your block, sometimes you have to like copy and paste your content, right? So it doesn't sound like this is necessarily going to fix that, other than the fact that maybe part of the recipe has that content piece in it, right? Is that correct?
So I would say that the answer to that part of using blocks is probably more the like the default content way of managing the content. If you're talking about moving that between environments, which is one of the pieces that got built into core as part of the whole recipe system. To me, I sort of see the place block config action is probably being more useful for blocks that are provided by things like, views or maybe, custom modules and some of those kinds of things. But it should be able to work with more content blocks, again, using that default content system that's now in core.
So that leads me to my second block problem, which I think this may actually help to alleviate, maybe if I'm hearing you right, is that like when you change themes, all your flipping blocks disappear, right? So this sounds like generalizing it to like, hey, whatever the, admin theme is, or hey, whatever the installed theme is, like try to find this type of region and put it in there. Could maybe resolve that issue, maybe not. Maybe I'm like blue skying it a little bit, but sounds like it could potentially solve that.
So I think what that probably underscores is that you would want to apply a recipe using this config action after you've got your site on the theme that you ultimately intend to deploy, as opposed to like, I'm going to start creating my site, use a bunch of recipes that apply blocks, and then switch over to a different theme. You're not going to be as happy with the result.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this is more of a help to people installing a new or using recipes than it is like to some of those other more thorny or possibly core issues with blocks, right?
Well, I think it's probably just more that there's a bit of an order of operations. So if at the end of the day, you don't intend to use Olivero as your site theme, then making that switch before you apply some recipes, may end up making your life easier.
Very interesting. Huh. That's cool. I like that. I like, I was a early adopter and a big fan of the config system in Drupal, and I still am a big fan of the config system. So any way we can make that more useful and, bringing in kind of recipes into that is like, if I had three hands, it would give it a triple thumbs up. So big fan. All right. Let's talk about our favorite modules. Batty, I'm going to start with you because this was your thing. So what do you got? What is your favorite contrib module?
Yeah. Okay. A lot to like, I know we should only mention one. And that's actually, that we need to pick one. And I'm really sorry for everyone that I'm not picking, but I'm picking a module that I use every day, and it's called front-end editing. So it basically like allows you to do front-end edit, like you edit your content. You don't have to go into edit mode, and you just do it all on the view mode, and it opens up in a sidebar on the side, and it works for so many things. And our editors absolutely love it because it's so simple to use, and I love it because I use it so much. And it also has previewing and all this stuff, so I can see the content before. And yeah, that's my favorite module.
Huh, interesting. Martin, what about you?
I'm going to break with tradition already and say I'm going to go with the Gin admin theme.
Yes, that would be number 2.
Yeah, something I just love to use all the time.
Interesting. Okay. Nick, what about you?
I'm going to say currently it's Migrate Boost. And it's a funny little module that I found somebody had created a sandbox a long time ago. So Migrate Boost is a module that allows you to skip certain hooks in events when you're running migration. So things like Search API and like queuing and things like that. And so I've talked about this before on the show, but I have a site where I run a migration that has over 1 million entities that get updated, and it runs really slow. This module allows you to skip a lot of those, and it speeds up migrations quite a bit, especially if you kind of like reindex everything for Search API after. And the reason why it's my current favorite is somebody created a sandbox years and years ago for it, and then somebody else created a GitHub project where they updated it for Drupal 9 in Drush. And so finally I was like, well, why is everybody like jumping around the internet? So I created a module and created a release for it and put it up. And just for myself to have it up there in a place for people who create issues. And then I didn't look at it. And then I was like, okay, I need to update it for Drupal 11. And like 60 or 70 sites are using it. I'm like, wait, where did this come from? And the reason why it's top of mind is somebody opened an issue yesterday because a new version of Drush doesn't work with it. And so I like posted the questions like what version of Drush are you working on, so I could fix it. And overnight somebody posted a merge request fixing the issue without my needing to actually work on it. And this is one of the first times a module that I maintain was just
nice,
randomly fixed by somebody. So I'm very appreciative of that. So that's currently my favorite. favorite module.
So maybe to mention, like I should have like for Martin, I should have said that has at least less than 50,000 installations, because obviously, I think the Gin admin theme has now 56,000 installations, and that's so amazing. And
it's funny.
So shout out to Sasha and of course all the companies that are sponsoring that module. But I think that, Martin, if I can ask you back, is there any one of the ones that are not like the, web forms, Gin admin theme? Is there anything that you remember that is like has only a couple of hundreds of installs, but it's really useful?
I think what she's asking is like, she should have said, what is your favorite obscure contrib module?
Yes.
All right, that's fair. And I guess I should also pick one that I haven't written.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, so the other one that I use all the time, and I'm pretty sure it fits into that category, is key save. So just the idea of like wherever you are on like a, entity form or one of the, admin forms in your Drupal UI, you can go Command S or Control S and it'll save the form. So I know Gin does, one of the things that's nice about Gin is it puts that button at the top, so you don't have to sort of search around for it. But I just love wherever I am on the page to just be able to go Command S is for me a huge time saver. And I definitely notice if I'm on a site where I don't have that installed versus one that I do. So
nice. Like coffee.
Exactly.
Oh man.
So cool.
Now because you've mentioned coffee, you've made me scratch my head as to my favorite contrib module. I'm gonna maybe cheat a little bit because this was a contrib module at one point, and now it's moving into core. Was recently added as experimental, but
navigation.
Yes, navigation, which previously I would have said admin toolbar, but like now navigation is like replacing that. So
I knew you were gonna say that one.
So yeah, so admin toolbar is obviously like my first install every Drupal site was like, I need drop downs and better. But now navigation is so good that I'm using that, and to be quite frank, I'm moving more towards core, like for my personal site, like as I'm building, I'm like, how can I stay closer to core? And I used to have the Gin admin theme, going back to Martin's pick there, but I installed that for the admin theme in core, and Claro, right? Claro, yeah, that's it. And like just moving more towards core. So like navigation to me now being experimental in core, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I'm going to use that. So I kind of cheated there. I apologize, but you should check it out if you haven't.
But I think if I look at the, why does it only say that it has 17 sites reporting using the module? Is it because like that was then the old one before it got merged into?
Yeah, I'm not sure that they're catching stats for the core version of it. On the module page.
Yeah, correct.
I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is that I believe Sasha had also taken that navigation style and put that as an experimental feature in the Gin admin theme that you could enable. Yeah, so there's probably people that were using it that way as opposed to installing the module.
Yeah, before I switched away from Gin, I was using that in Gin, and dark mode in Gin is a good one. I would honestly recommend we bring that into Drupal core, but yeah, I guess I could put a feature request in.
So I think it is interesting. I know that, we are here off topic, or like we don't have a special topic to talk about, but, I hear you say, John, I'm curious, I want to use more stuff that is in core. I am a little bit on the other side. I want to have less stuff in core, and I want to then instead like maybe have and I think that's something that Starship is bringing us to have like this focus on like these 50 awesome modules that we are actually like that. Does it all have to go into core?
No, it doesn't. So I am I'm a very complicated individual. I am very much a believer in like small core, right? For my personal site, I try to stick with core because it's just easier to maintain for me that way, right? And it also, in building client projects, I try to stick with core because I know that core features are going to be well maintained. They're going to be continue to get feature improvements, right? But there is a huge ecosystem of modules out there, and it's great to be able to pull from that when needed to integrate with different services to enable, as Martin highlighted today, features for API or headless functionality that don't come out of core, right? So yeah, definitely a big believer in the contrib space, but like, I try to stick to core as much as possible for the stuff that it does well, just so that way I don't have to, I don't have to kind of like have the maintenance burden of another module.
So which actually like takes that conversation where I think that Starshot is gonna, so by introducing some modules into Starshot default config or default recipe, and then the recipes that are in it, we will need to change some governance probably around those contrib modules who are just out there. And I think like, totally to your point, we can have the core, we can then have the well-maintained governed modules, which is maybe 50, 100, I don't know how many, but these are the ones that like there is actually governance, and we have to make sure that there's like always a maintainer there, and I don't know what. And then you have the Wild West, which is, why we love Drupal. And
yeah, there's
work to be done there, I think.
That definitely makes sense. And like, I'm really excited about recipes. I mean, I think that's going to be a huge, huge win for the Drupal community. Like, install profiles and, the other thing, distributions, there it is, were great, but once you kind of got pinned to those, you're kind of like, all right. And in my opinion, that actually caused a lot of people to like say, oh, I'm going to go do my own thing because I don't want to be pinned to this other thing.
Yes,
right.
Correct.
So like now being able to say, hey, I'm going to install this recipe, and if I don't like it or I want to change it, I can go ahead and do it. Like, there's going to be a lot of power in that, and it's going to be great for the community. So yeah, I try to stick to core. Navigation is two thumbs up in my opinion. So check it out. All right, let's talk about the contrib channel in Slack, which seems like an obvious one, but Nick, I'm sure you have some sort of spin on it.
Yeah, so it's the contribute channel in Slack. So if you're looking to contribute to Drupal or have a contrib module that you need some help with, some more technical help, I found that this channel is really helpful for the more technical questions. And I really enjoy being in there because people will pose, like, I found it's a good way to kind of keep an ear to the ground kind of thing and know what people are working on. Like if there's a big core bug or something, obviously security issues are kind of excluded from there, but if there's a big core bug that's like causing problems, there's going to be some chatter in there. So it's a good way to keep on top of that. It's also, sometimes you'll be able to see how caching layer things work. Like there's a lot of really good technical information if you're just trying to get a good handle on what kind of core or contrib issues that people are dealing with. It's a good place to be. So I've really enjoyed being in there. I've been in that channel now for a few months, and I feel like my knowledge of Drupal as a project has grown pretty significantly just by, monitoring the chatter there.
Nick, do you feel like it's a good channel for newcomers, or do you feel like it's a little high level for that?
It's definitely more developer centric. I would say if you're a newer developer and you're maintaining a module, working on an issue, it's pretty welcome. But a lot of protocol issues for any large channels kind of apply. You don't want to spam it. You really want to try to stick to threads. You want to be respectful. Like all that stuff still applies. But yeah, I haven't seen them ever turn away somebody just because they're a little bit newer. The only time there's been pushback is, some people have put like spammy sales stuff in there, obviously, and then a couple people are somewhat demanding. But that's a separate issue from contribute. Like if you're new and you're struggling with something, people will help out.
Yeah, What I struggle with on that channel, is that there's 4,122 members. And that's a little bit like, like I'm not gonna post anything in there. So I would always probably go and search for something, more detailed, or so I think it is really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. You actually, you see this as a, to get the knowledge of like a little bit what's going on. So I haven't looked at it that way. It's more of like I don't know if I should ask a question, and there's like 4,100 people that I'm basically pinging. Of course, I'm not doing here, but you get my point.
Yeah. It's a valid concern, but the thing is, it feels more, because it's so focused, it actually feels more active. Like, you're not always going to get an answer. Like, you can never guarantee that in this type of channel. But even with that many people, it's not so active that you can't scroll back a day or two and see everything that's happened, right? You know how some channels get super spammed.
Would you say it focuses more on core issues than actually just general contribution?
I'd say, if I had to guess, it's probably 60-40 core, so probably a little bit more core. But one of the things that's been helpful is sometimes sometimes something will break with a test, for example, in core, and like every merge request starts failing. I find that information, it's much easier to find that type of information in this channel than on Drupal.org. Like, obviously there's going to be a Drupal.org issue for that, but finding that specific issue sometimes is a little bit difficult. Or are you doing something wrong or something like that? Whereas if there's like a broken test everywhere, like, people are probably going to be collaborating in there as well as on the issue. Now, again, you also don't want to be like, hey, I just responded to this issue and ping it immediately. But I would definitely spend a little bit of time there before posting a ton of issues to kind of see how people are using the channel. But I found it, like I said, really, really helpful. And it's one of the ways that I found some issues that are kind of interesting that I've contributed to. Like, you see somebody post something, you look at the issue, you're like, oh, I could answer that question, or I could write that change notice, or I could update that test. So it's definitely where I've been lurking a lot there and kind of interacting here and there.
I wanted to maybe quickly give a couple of shout outs to, I think, maybe related channels in Slack. So certainly, Nick, in the example you gave about every merge request starting to fail, that's actually something I ran into a little while ago. And there's actually a GitLab CI channel where I was able to get some input on people who had made the change that was basically giving me that exact problem. And they pointed me to the issue where the change was made, and then I could update my own CI file to sort of get things back to normal. So that was super helpful. There is also, for people who are more on the contrib side of things, a channel called Maintainers. And I find that one can be really useful if you have questions around, how to manage, people spamming your issue queue, or, different kinds of things that are kind of more like project, maintenance related. I've personally found that one really helpful.
So
yeah, sorry, John, that reminds me too. There's also contribution recognition feedback. If you start seeing people,
I'm there.
Yeah, if you start seeing people spamming your issues, or you're trying to get a gate, like, obviously, if you're maintaining a module, you're the one that makes the decision whether to credit something. But if there's something that you're not sure if the community generally credits a particular type of contribution, or if there's been issues with a particular user in the past, contribution recognition feedback is kind of the place. Or you just need to vent. It's kind of a good channel for that.
This is actually a great session for DrupalCon. If you think about or any Drupal event that is going on, is that like a little bit like, what are the main channels on the Drupal Slack, and where can you find information? Because I think there are so many, and I'm probably part of something that Martin is probably only part of 10% of those that I am involved in, and he sees another version of the Drupal Slack than I do, right? So I think it would be a good session to have maybe put together a couple of people and then say okay, what are the 5 most important channels on Drupal Slack?
Well, number 1 is the Talking Drupal channel. That's obviously the most important. We always announce the most recent episode there.
All right, and moving on. Just out of curiosity, a yes or no question. Slack threads, Martin, yes or no?
Definitely.
Nick?
Depends how big the channel is. If there's 2 or 3 people in the channel, no. If there's more than 2 or 3 people, absolutely. Like and some of our listeners will appreciate this. I used to have a habit of just spamming many messages in a row, and they get me in the habit of using threads. It makes it so much easier to follow.
That is Nick's love language, is train of thought Slack messaging. Batty.
So we have definitely threads. It's not so simple in Drupal Slack, but in our company, if a thread becomes more than 20, 30, then there is a reason to set up a short call.
Oh man, if there have been, so I'm going to go on a little tirade here. There have been instances where I've like not been in the Talking Drupal Slack, and I've come back, and Nick and Martin and maybe Matt Glomman and like a bunch of other people, like there's literally like 100 messages in a thread, and I'm just like, nope, not gonna read that. Just not gonna do it, guys. Not gonna do it. I'll skim it, like, oh, okay, cool. But like, I don't know. I see the use of threads, but sometimes they just drive me absolutely off the wall.
Well, here's the thing though. If we hadn't put those in threads, then any other messages that had come interstitially, you would have missed.
Yeah, and I appreciate it in that instance. I can understand why that went to a threaded conversation, but anyway, I was just curious. All right, let's talk about Drupal 11, and in particular, preparing for, well, Martin wants to talk about preparing modules for Drupal 11. I just really want to talk about preparing for Drupal 11 in general. But Martin, in particular, what can people do to prepare their modules for Drupal 11?
So I'd say one of the things that's great about Drupal 11 is that the transition to it should be much easier even than from 9 to 10. So 9 to 10 in general, I don't think was too bad, but a couple of things ended up being pretty thorny. So number one was the fact that Symfony jumped 2 major versions. And I work on at least one module where that actually became impossible, literally, to have a module that could support both major versions for that reason. And then the change to CKEditor 5 also, was a big hurdle for a number of modules. The other thing is for Drupal 11, we now have this really cool deprecation helper class that you can use. And Matt Glomman, I got talking to him a little bit about it at MidCamp, and he helped me out with some code. There's actually a blog post about it on his site, mglomman.dev, about the code that he sort of put together for Smart Dates, so that I was able to handle the deprecated code, but still maintain full backwards compatibility in a way that, will work seamlessly for new major versions. I'm definitely looking forward to the day when I'm comfortable saying all modules can require at least 10.1, because that's when the deprecation helper was introduced. So that right now there's a little bit of extra code to basically say, if there's no such thing as deprecation helper, fall back to the old method. And then you have to sort of like tell PHP stand to ignore that. And it's like a little bit of an annoying thing. So it'll be nice when we can just say like, everything is 10.1 forward, but even to have that deprecation helper class is, I think, going to be a huge benefit. And we're probably already seeing, as a community of contrib developers, the benefits of the work that was done in that.
Yeah. I've been slow. I've been trying to update all my modules for Drupal 11 over the next few weeks.
Drupal 7.11?
Yeah, Drupal 11.
It's open 24 hours,
I've been working on it, and I think I do something wrong, but like half the modules I work on, the project update bot just doesn't create a merge request or doesn't create something. It's still been a huge help. I still appreciate all the work that the team makes for Drupal Rector, Drupal PHP stand, and the update bot, because it saved me a ton of time. But I think I'm doing something wrong that just doesn't make that bot very happy. But the thing that I've been running into a particular issue with on one project is some deprecation. So one thing that I learned recently is PHP stand can't differentiate between deprecations. So there's a deprecation in one of the modules I maintain right now that was deprecated in 10.3 and removed in Drupal 12. And it causes the PHP stand job to fail. And I don't first of all, I don't need to update that for Drupal 11 because it's not removed until Drupal 12. And I don't particularly want to update that thing because although the deprecation helper might work here, if I understand it correctly, because if I remove the deprecated code, that means that it's not going to work for anything below Drupal 10.3 because the new code wasn't provided until 10.3. And I don't want to make it available, make that module. I don't want to pin that module to 10.3 minimum yet.
So I don't know if it's the same issue that you're talking about, but I've definitely run into something on a couple of modules where there was something deprecated in like 10.2. It was replaced with a different sort of like deeper parent class that ultimately provides the same method, but PHP Stan assumes that you're using the older one from the deprecated class, even though in terms of like how you would write the code, it's no different. And so I actually had a colleague, point out that what you can do in that specific instance is within the function, sometimes you'll have sort of that code type hint comment.
Yeah.
And if you just update the type hint comment to the newer class, it's not going to break anything because it doesn't actually run anything. But PHP Stan will now understand that you're using the method from, the replacement classes as opposed to the older deprecated one.
Yeah, I mean, one of the two big recommendations that I got in the contribute channel, by the way, about this is one person mentioned I could just tell PHP Stan to ignore that line and put a to-do in. But that makes me nervous because if I forget to look at the to-dos for Drupal 12, it's going to break things. And if I'm not maintaining that module anymore and somebody else takes over, they have to know to do that. The other thing that somebody mentioned that I might do is they mentioned that they only run PHP Stan right before they're ready to update or, periodically and address what they need to and then just turn that job off. And I might do that too, just because I don't know. Like I want PHP Stan to run, but it's also a lot of resources for the DA to run PHP Stan on all these projects, especially if you're just going to ignore the results for most of them.
Can you, because it's so great that you're speaking about Drupal 11, right? So can you maybe help us to remember what is going to be the release day? Because it was going to be either the 29th of July or the December 9th. Will the July 29th, is that
July.
The date?
Yeah, it is going to be July.
3 weeks.
In fact, by the time this episode comes out, we should have the RC1 release for Drupal 11.
It's quick. It's coming quick.
Interesting. I am very excited about Drupal 11. So I hope everybody else is too. Let's move on to one last question, and I'm interested in this one because I think the answer is for at least one member here is going to be, hey, I'm keynoting at this thing coming up in a few weeks. So what is the next Drupal event you plan to go to? And Martin, I'll start with you.
Well, funny you should ask, John. I was recently asked to be the keynote speaker at Drupal Camp Ottawa, which I've not technically been to before. For a while, we had a regional conference that we called Drupal North, and I've been to that a couple of times. But this will be my first time at Drupal Camp Ottawa and also my first time as a keynote speaker at any Drupal camp. So definitely excited about that one. That'll be on August 2nd.
Yeah, and if you live in the New England area of the United States, it's only an 8-hour drive or so. So you could go to Canada.
And actually, Ottawa is a lovely city. Being a national capital, there's all kinds of great museums and different things to see. So it's a great family spot there as well.
What did you decide on for your topic?
So the working title of my keynote is Chart Your Own Drupal Journey. And it's really about sort of, particularly in the age of Starshot and so much that needs to be done before the end of the year, how can people sort of use that as an opportunity to jump in and really sort of follow their passions as part of the Drupal community?
Cool. Patty, what about you?
Yeah, so Of course, DrupalCon Barcelona. I need to say this in every single episode, happening in the end of September. So what is actually an interesting event happening here in Germany is Drupal Camping 2024 in a town here called Wolfsburg. And what is really interesting about this is that the Drupal community in Germany comes together and they camp. They put up tents and we sleep outside. And it's such a great event that has been going on for so many years now. And then there's we talk about Drupal. We do we set up some, places where we can maybe work if it doesn't rain.
That is
Drupal
a phenomenal idea.
Amazing. Happening on the 22nd of August to the 25th of August.
Literally,
in Germany.
So now you can go to Canada on the 2nd, you can go to Germany on the 22nd, and then you can go to Spain at the end of September.
All with a bike. No.
There you go. Nick, what about you?
Probably the next one I'll go to is New England, Ned Camp.
There you go. All right. Well, I will also be there. Before that, I think I'll probably go to Acquia Engage, which isn't technically a Drupal camp, but it is a Drupal adjacent event. So
is that happening before DrupalCon? In Barcelona?
It'll be after, I think. It'll probably be in November, maybe first week in November. I think it was last year. So we'll see.
No, a shout out to the Drupal Camp Berlin, which is going to be a 10-year anniversary happening in November. It's brand new. So if you want to come to Germany in November, come to Drupal Camp Berlin.
So a couple of other events we can give a shout out to. So GovCon is one of the bigger Drupal camps coming up in August. Actually, I'll be there on my birthday giving a talk.
That's how much he loves the Drupal community.
That's right.
In Washington, right? In Washington, D.C.
Technically Baltimore, but Washington area. Yeah. In September, there's also Twin Cities Drupal Camp. And in October, one that I just heard about, Pacific Northwest Drupal Camp as well.
Very cool. All right. Thank all of you for participating and bringing such great topics to our show today.
Do you have any questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and the listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button. All right, we have reached the end of our show. Batty, if folks wanted to get a hold of you, how could they go about doing that?
It's Batty Sonja on all social media and Drupal, BADDYSONJA. And of course, DrupalCon Barcelona in September.
And you can check out 1x Internet at 1xinternet.com, .eu, .de, .any of those?
IS, ES, all of the languages.
All of the above. There you go. Awesome. Martin, what about you?
Folks can reach me as Manclue on all the Drupal and social platforms, or they can read my blog posts at manclue.com.
Perfect. Nick?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixman, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.